There is a moment that happens to almost everyone who successfully builds savings, and almost nobody sees it coming. You open your banking app one day expecting the same number you always see. Instead, you see $20,000, and for a second, you feel nothing unusual. You close the app. You go about your day. But something has already shifted, something your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. $20,000 is not just double your first $10,000. It is a completely different psychological event, and almost nobody explains what happens next. Here is what most people get wrong about growing savings. They assume the emotional experience of money scales in a straight line. That saving your second $10,000 feels roughly like saving your first, just with a bigger number attached. But the research on this tells a very different story. The first $10,000 is about survival. It is about building a buffer between you and disaster. The second $10,000, the one that pushes you to 20, is about something else entirely. It is the moment your brain stops asking, "Am I safe?" and starts asking, "What do I do with this?" That question is far more dangerous than it sounds. Economist Shlomo Benartzi, whose earlier research helped explain how people save, also studied something just as revealing: how people behave once they actually have money to allocate. He found that when people are faced with multiple ways to divide their savings, most default to something researchers call naive diversification. Give someone 3 investment options, and they will often split their money 3 ways, equally regardless of what those options actually are. Give them 5 options, and they'll often split it 5 ways. Not because the math supports it, because dividing things evenly feels safe even when it isn't. The moment your savings crosses into a range large enough to actually diversify, this instinct kicks in immediately, and it often produces decisions nobody would have made on purpose. $20,000 is exactly the range where this starts to matter. Below that, most people don't have enough to meaningfully diversify anyway, so the instinct stays dormant. Above it, suddenly there are choices: a high-yield savings account, an index fund, maybe a second index fund, individual stocks a friend mentioned, cryptocurrency someone posted about. The instinct to split evenly across all of it doesn't ask whether that's smart. It just wants to feel like nothing was left out. This is the first hidden shift that happens around $20,000, but it's not the only one. Behavioral finance researcher Meir Statman has spent decades studying how people actually think about their money, not how economic models assume they think about it. One of his central findings is that people don't treat their savings as one unified pool. They build it in layers, almost like a pyramid. The bottom layer is safety money, the kind that protects against disaster. Above that sits a second layer, money meant for growth, for taking on more risk in exchange for more potential reward. Most people don't consciously design this structure. It emerges naturally as their savings grow, and the $10,000 to $20,000 range is almost exactly where that second layer starts to form for the first time. This matters because the 2 layers require completely different decisions and completely different emotional postures. The first $10,000 asks you to be defensive, conservative, focused on not losing what you have. The next $10,000, the one that gets you to 20, starts asking you to be a little more aggressive, to tolerate some volatility in exchange for growth. Most people never consciously notice this shift is supposed to happen. They keep applying survival mode thinking to money that has already outgrown that role. Here's where it gets more interesting and slightly more dangerous. Researcher Terrance Odean, who has spent his career studying how individual investors actually behave, found something that should make anyone with growing savings pay attention. As people's account balances increase, so does their confidence. Not gradually, disproportionately. A larger number in an account creates a sense of competence that often has nothing to do with actual financial skill. People with bigger balances trade more frequently, take on more risk, and make more active decisions, even though the research consistently shows that more activity tends to produce worse returns, not better ones. The number in the account grows. So does the ego attached to it, and those 2 things are not supposed to be connected, but they almost always are. This phenomenon has a name in behavioral finance: the house money effect. It was first documented by Richard Thaler and Eric Johnson in a study that found people treat gains differently from money they worked hard to save. Money that feels like it grew on its own, through returns rather than direct effort, gets treated with less caution. It feels less real, even though it spends exactly the same as money you earn. Once your savings crosses $20,000, a meaningful portion of that number often isn't money you deposited. It's money that grew, and your brain, without asking permission, starts treating that portion as less precious than it actually is. This is why $20,000 is a rule, not just a number. It's the point where 3 separate psychological forces start operating at once. The pull toward naive diversification, the formation of a second, riskier layer in your mental structure of money, and the quiet overconfidence that comes from watching a balance grow past a threshold that used to feel significant. None of this means $20,000 is dangerous. It means it's a decision point, and most people walk through it without realizing a decision is even being made. So what does handling this threshold will actually look like? First, the diversification instinct needs a framework instead of a feeling. Splitting money evenly across options because it feels fair is not a strategy. It's an emotional default. A better approach treats the first layer, the safety layer, as complete once your emergency fund is fully funded, and only then starts intentionally building a second layer with a specific purpose, whether that's long-term growth through a retirement account or a taxable investment account for goals further down the road. The key word is intentionally, not evenly, not automatically, on purpose. Second, the mental layering that Statman identified can actually be used to your advantage instead of working against you. If you consciously decide that your first $10,000 is your safety layer and your second $10,000 is your growth layer, you give yourself permission to treat them differently without confusion. The safety layer stays boring, liquid, and untouched except in emergencies. The growth layer can tolerate the ordinary ups and downs of the market because you've already decided its job is different. Third, and this is the one most people miss entirely, the house money effect needs to be named out loud before it can be resisted. If you notice yourself feeling casual about money that grew through returns rather than direct contribution, that's the exact moment to slow down. The healthiest move is to mentally treat all the money in that account the same way, regardless of where each dollar came from. A dollar of gains and a dollar of your own deposit have identical purchasing power. Only your brain treats them differently, and only if you let it. There's a broader pattern hiding underneath all of this. Every financial threshold you cross doesn't just change what you can do with your money, it changes how your brain relates to it. $10,000 shifted you from fragile to stable. $20,000 shifts you from saver to something closer to an investor, whether you feel ready for that role or not. The number changes faster than the identity does, and in that gap between the new balance and the old mindset is exactly where costly mistakes tend to happen. This is also why the $20,000 mark tends to be where people either accelerate dramatically or stall out entirely. Some people, hit with the sudden sense of having real money for the first time, get pulled into decisions driven by overconfidence, chasing higher returns without understanding the risk they're taking on. Others, uncomfortable with the responsibility that comes with a growing second layer, freeze completely, leaving money sitting in cash long after it should have been put to work. Both reactions come from the same source. Nobody told them this threshold was coming or what it was going to ask of them. Now you know what's actually happening the next time you check your balance and see a number that starts with a 2 instead of a 1. It's not just more money, it's a different set of questions your brain is quietly starting to ask, whether you've noticed yet or not. There's one more piece of this that deserves attention because it explains why some people cross this threshold smoothly while others stumble right at the edge of it. Psychologist Hirsch Sheffrin, who has written extensively about self-control and financial decision-making, found that people are far better at following rules they set for themselves in advance than rules they try to invent in the moment. This sounds obvious, but it explains almost everything about why the $20,000 mark trips people up. Nobody sits down at $10,000 and decides, in a calm, unpressured moment, how they'll handle the next layer of savings. They wait until the balance actually crosses the line, and by then, the decision is being made under the influence of excitement or overconfidence, or simple curiosity about what the money could become. A decision made in that state rarely looks like a decision made in advance. This is why the smartest move available to you right now, whether you're approaching $20,000 or nowhere close to it yet, is to decide today what your second layer is for. Not vaguely. Specifically, is it a down payment fund? Is it long-term retirement growth? Is it a bridge towards starting a business? The purpose you assign to that money before it exists will do more to protect you from naive diversification, from overconfidence, and from the house money effect than any amount of willpower applied after the fact. Consider what this looks like in practice. Someone who decides in advance that their growth layer exists purely for retirement and automatically routes it into a diversified index fund the moment it's available never has to make an emotional decision about it later. There's no moment of choosing between 5 investment options out of a desire to feel like nothing was missed. There's no slow drift toward overconfidence as the balance grows, because the plan was never about proving anything. It was set once, in a clear-headed moment, and it simply runs. Compare that to someone who reaches $20,000 with no predetermined purpose for the second half of it. Every dollar past $10,000 becomes a small, ongoing negotiation with themselves. Should this go toward stocks? Should some of it stay in cash? just in case? Should a portion go towards something more exciting, since it technically counts as growth money anyway? Each of these questions feels small in isolation. Together, they are exactly the kind of repeated decision-making that behavioral research consistently shows leads to worse outcomes than a single decision made in advance and left alone. The $20,000 rule, in the end, isn't really about the number 20,000 at all. It's about recognizing that every meaningful increase in your savings changes the psychological demands being placed on you, long before it changes what you're capable of doing with the money. The first threshold asks you to become someone who could absorb a setback. This one is asking you to become someone who can handle growth without losing your footing. Most people aren't warned that this second identity shift is coming, so they meet it unprepared, reacting instead of deciding. There is a moment that happens to almost everyone who successfully builds savings, and now, when it happens to you, you won't be one of the people who misses it.